Good morning, everyone. Slightly difficult, I think, to follow that wonderful conversation between Mo and Amina, but we are very much going to try. The first session was all about getting our facts straight and really understanding what's happening in terms of mobility on the continent and the synergy between migration and governance. This session is about future challenges and opportunities of the African job market. Skills and jobs have come up in practically every conversation that we have been having since yesterday. And it was a big focus in the Now Generation Forum yesterday as well. And there is obviously a big contradiction in terms of the youth bulge on the continent, which is offering significant opportunities, but also the challenges in terms of education, skills development, and ensuring that the young people are actually able to take advantage of those opportunities. So we have a wonderful panel to help us to think through those questions. Now, Mo, I've been asked to say thank you on behalf of the panel for the invitation to the forum, because we're all going to go straight to it. So by way of introduction, starting on my left, the inaugural Chatham House Fellow and Head of Programs for Well Told Story, Natasha Kimani. Next to Natasha, we have the Chief Economist of the Human Development Group at the World Bank, Roberta Gatti. Next to Roberta, somebody who doesn't need introduction to this audience, former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Hailemariam. And next to him, we have the Minister of Petroleum, Energy and Renewable Energy here in Côte d'Ivoire, Cissé. And last but not least, the President of the African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina. So I have agreed with the panel that they will each do a 5-minute introduction. I have said that you will all help me when they start to go over that 5 minutes, when I try to draw their remarks to a close, because like President Johnson Sirleaf in the first panel, we want this to be interactive and we want to hear from you. So we're going to start with former Prime Minister Hailemariam, who is going to try to address that contradiction that we have on the continent in terms of these huge opportunities, but also these significant challenges. Former Prime Minister.
Thank you very much. First of all, I think we have to see that this contradiction is there because the policy and action is not matching in Africa. I want to be more practical this time because, we don't want to see next year when you come to this conference, nothing changed, and we talk about the same thing again, and again continuing on in conferences. So the most important thing for us now is the takeaway from this conference. First of all, we all agree that migration is taking place in the continent. And the data was showing us that 70% is within the African continent. But when you segregate this, it is in West Africa, for example, it is 90%. So I think the whole issue is how to make our youth, which they have told us this time, that they are deeply dissatisfied, economically marginalized, and socially, as well as civil and politically, they are also marginalized. So doesn't it call for a sense of urgency? So I think it triggers a sense of urgency, and we, leaders, as well as civil society groups and partners, should think about this issue as a sense of urgency to our continent. That's, I think, the most important issue we have to see. When I come to the practical issues, I think let's look into our education and skill for life and work for our youth. I think this is the basics where we have to start. When I see this, I think we shouldn't focus on all kinds of skills, but the skills that are necessary to engage at the economic and social development we are in Africa. We are at the bottom of the economic ladder, and so therefore, we are also, as a latecomers, we have a number of advantages. So we need to focus on those issues in our skills development programs. And that's the basic. Our young people, even though you create some kind of jobs at this time, are we ready for having the necessary skills that they deliver on those skills? So I think this is the most important issue we have to address practically. In my country, Ethiopia, we focused our education system in such a way that the vocational and technical trainings and education takes the most priority. Of course, primary and secondary education is important, but for our young people, the most important level of skill we have to deliver is at the technical and vocational level. So I think it should be a result-oriented technical and vocational training and education, which is very essential. Let me give you one example again, that in most countries in Africa, we neglected our agricultural sector. We do not have the skills and attractive provisions to our young people in our agricultural sector. But that's the main stake for us, where 70% of our people are engaged in. Even now, 50% of our young people are in agriculture, but they are not attracted in agriculture. They are forced to be in agriculture. So we need to modernize our agriculture, and we need to bring smart agriculture, both in terms of technology as well as climate, because the climate issue is complicating the whole agricultural production in Africa. And if we don't address this issue and make it climate smart, that's very difficult for our young people to engage in agriculture. They lose hope immediately when they engage in agricultural sector. So I think we have best practices elsewhere. We have to emulate those best practices, and Ethiopia is doing this, emulating from India, from China, from Israel, those technologies that can work for us in Ethiopia, that can engage many. And we have to change from subsistence to commercial agriculture, producing surplus, and again, from rain-fed agriculture to irrigated high-tech agriculture and high-value production. So agriculture can take most of our young people into the economy. Second, I think we are also focusing on digital and entrepreneurial skills, which is very important at this time of our stage of development. As a latecomers, we can leapfrog in these areas, and I think our young people are very much friendly to technology and digital. Therefore, we need to have the information technology and as well as digital infrastructure in place. So I will come later on how we can do it. So I think the what of it is always there, but the how and how to deliver is the main issue that we have to focus in. I mean, we talk many things in our conferences, but it's always, it's not raining, it's just a cloud, and that shouldn't happen anyway. So I think we need to change this issue very much. Now, Africa has gone for safety.
We have about 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Ali.
So I think, the infrastructure issue is very important, and we have to address the infrastructure deficit, and therefore partnership comes here, where the public-private partnership and our donor communities and the private sector and financial institutions, maybe my brother Adesina can talk about it, we need to answer the quest of our young people as quickly as possible. As a matter of fact, it's a sense of urgency.
Thank you very much. And I think the themes that you've identified are going to be picked up by our other speakers. So what I'm going to do is to come to Minister Cissé next, because I know that the issues of education and skills development are very important to you. But I wanted to ask you to say something about the role that governments have. You may have heard one of our panelists in the first panel say that don't rely on government. So what is the role of government in terms of, for example, promoting inclusive growth? We've seen tremendous growth here in Côte d'Ivoire, but I know that there has been a huge concern that the benefits of that growth aren't being equally distributed. So if you could perhaps pick up on that and the issue of education and the role of government, that would be hugely helpful.
Avant tout, bienvenue en Côte d'Ivoire.
Before everything, welcome to Côte d'Ivoire for all those who are here.
Okay. So it's an honor for our country to host the Ibrahim Governance Weekend. I'm going to go straight to the point that you actually mentioned. But before that, I wanted to just say that, as it was said before on the previous panel, migration is not the issue. But I will say it's not yet the issue. Because when you look at the numbers, when you look at the number of jobs that we need to create up to 2050, we know that if we don't fix the problem, we're going to have issues in our continent. Now, the problem is not only unemployment. The problem is also the low quality of jobs that we have and underemployment for our young people. So we need to look at ways to make sure that we actually find good quality jobs for people. Otherwise, they will leave the country. What are the solutions? Education is definitely one of them, and particularly education for women. I'm not saying that because it's politically correct. I'm saying it because it actually really works. We need to make sure that our young girl sisters have access to good education. We all know in our environment, people that work hard, go to school, have a degree, but at the end of the day, that degree is just a piece of paper. It doesn't help them to get a job. So as the Prime Minister was saying, we need to make sure that the skills that they get at school match the needs of the employers. And that's something really important. In Côte d'Ivoire, what we've been trying to do under the leadership of President Ouattara was to make sure that we focus on vocational training. So we created some new schools, for example, for IT in 2012. All the new universities that we're building, so Mans on one part of the country, San Pedro, are going to be focused on technical skills. So it's going to be petroleum, it's going to be mining, it's going to be electricity. So we make sure that we actually invest in areas where we know that the student at the end will have access to jobs. One thing that we tried to do also was to make sure that we give tax incentives for companies to hire students straight after university. We also give tax incentives to make sure that they actually hire for internship. Because one thing that we notice is it's really important for people to have at least some kind of experience. Otherwise, they go out of school, they apply for jobs, they don't have experience, and they don't actually fill the gap. So that's something really important. At the same time, we talk about innovation. Innovation is key. But if you want people to innovate, you need to make sure that they have access to the different tools. So, of course, you need to invest into the hard, so fiber, optical fiber. You need to invest in a lot of different things, but you need to make sure that they have access to computers and all. So what we did in 2015 was basically to reduce the import cost of laptops and all. So people used to pay around like 35% of tax. Now they only pay 6%. I used to be budget minister, and by the way, when we reduce the tax level, we actually made more money. Don't ask me why. But
more people pay.
We actually make more as a state. So that's really important for us. Second thing is governance. People mentioned governance earlier. Governance goes right-handed with business environment. We need to make sure that we have a good business environment and good governance to make sure that people benefit from what is being produced. People talk about inclusiveness of growth, but before we reach to inclusiveness of growth, you actually need to have growth first. If you don't have growth, we won't be talking about inclusiveness of growth. So we need to make sure that you have growth. In Côte d'Ivoire, we actually put a strong focus on investment. So we've been investing a lot. We improve our governance. If you look at our numbers for the Mo Ibrahim, for example, governance ranking, we moved from the 41st place to the 22nd. Of course, we know we need to do a lot more. But we've been growing over the past 6 to 7 years at around 8% per annum. But we know it's not enough because we see part of the population still lagging behind. And with the help of DFIs like the African Development Bank, and by the way, thanks Adesina for what you agreed to do 2 weeks ago, we actually put together a specific plan over the next 2 years that will focus on social sectors. As far as, for example, electricity is concerned, we want to make sure that every place in Côte d'Ivoire, people have access to electricity. In 2011, the rate of electrification was around 33%. We moved from 33% to 60% today. The goal over the next 2 years is to get to 80%. And then after, in 2025, to get to 100%. That will have a multiplication effect. If you have a student that can only study up to 6 p.m., when he has the opportunity to study 2 more hours because he has access to electricity, you can see in terms of productivity what might be the impact. So these are areas where we really want to focus. But last but not something quite also important is we need to have, young people need to be accountable also, because it's not only government. We need to make sure that also the young are accountable. We need to see a lot more young people in politics. A lot of them are afraid of going into politics. I might be one of them, actually. I'm afraid of going into politics also. But we need to have a lot more young people engaged into politics, engage into public sector roles. And we need, at this point, to give credit where credit is due. When you have presidents like President Ouattara, who actually appoint young people as ministers, it's something that you need to acknowledge. I was appointed, I was 32. Now I'm an old minister. I've been minister for 6 years. But when I was minister the first time, I was appointed at 32. We need to have a lot more of this kind of example in other parts of the world, because the discussion that is having at the moment is for the young people. So they need to be part of the discussion in order to say the word. That's what I wanted to say to start with.
Abdouta, thank you. And you've highlighted a number of issues which I think need to be brought together in terms of the solutions that are being identified, and speak directly, I think, Roberta, to some of the work that you've been doing, Roberta Gatti, at the World Bank in terms of the Human Capital Index and trying to identify what that gap is in terms of human capital, lack of investment, and the future and future prospects. So can you say something about the importance of data, evidence, and the importance of that investment, and what it means on the African continent, and what needs to be done to ensure that that investment happens?
Thank you, Valerie. You speak about something that is very close to my heart. I spent the best part of the last year and a half together with a group of colleagues to develop the Human Capital Index, which is an index that tries to capture in one metric the trajectory of human capital of a child from birth to age 18, and translates this number into productivity, into the potential income that is lost because of shortfalls in health and education. Why did we engage in this? I wanted to go back to a statistics that I heard a lot today. 50% of the population in Africa is below age 25. Africa is the youngest continent in the world. This is a blessing. This is a blessing in a world that is evolving the other way, where the working age population has already peaked and is declining globally, and where other regions are struggling with maintaining productivity growth and coping with potentially higher health spending because of aging. However, this blessing does not translate automatically into an economic opportunity, and it takes a lot to do that. And we heard today many of these steps that are needed, many of these actions that are needed to do that. Stripped to the bare bones, it takes a business climate that works, an environment for investment where firms can enter, compete, grow, or fail if they're not productive. And on the other hand, it takes a fundamental pillar, particularly for Africa, to make progress in human capital outcomes. This is why we engaged into producing an index and to putting out there a number that can help catalyze attention, elevate the conversation from ministries that are always well-meaning, but they're always stretched and sometimes underfunded. So for Africa, the Human Capital Index, and you might have seen it revolve around in the slides, indicates that Africa, if things continue as they are, stands to lose 60% of its income potential because of shortfalls to learning, schooling, and health. 60% is a big number. If we look at it in a positive, that means there is a great opportunity there to be seized, and the time is now. We felt that the index, not unlike the index of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, so I kind of feel I'm speaking to the converted crowd here on the importance of data, is bringing together the necessity of investing in human capital. And more than 60 countries, including Côte d'Ivoire, our host country today, have joined as human capital project countries to really bring together their cabinet with the sense of urgency to invest in human capital. Now, another important function of data is not only to shine the light, but to keep the attention and the tension high, also bridging across political transitions. We know that it's very important to invest in human capital, but we also know that it takes years and years from a small child who goes to primary school to become a successful professional. It takes 15, 18, 20 years. We as societies need to be patient, and politics is not always patient and long-sighted. So that's another important advocacy function of data. Another function is to really help us on the how, and Prime Minister Desalegn was telling us the important is the how. Now we really need to think about the how. So for Africa, the first port of call is spending for human capital. We know that spending for human capital in Africa is low and stagnant. And even when spending happens, it doesn't always translate in good results. Alongside with the index, we are fielding surveys, again, data, in countries, now we have reached 15 countries, measuring the average experience of a citizen at the point of contact with service delivery, schools and health posts. So it turns out that where we measured, and this is all nationally representative, 1/3 of teachers are not teaching when they ought to. Up to 50% of diagnoses are routinely incorrect. And this is not an issue that's unique to Africa, but this is the place where we could make the most difference for the most people. So the importance of focusing on spending more, but also spending better, is fundamental. And here is also where data can make a big difference. When citizens know that this happens, they can take things in their hands, and they can help with their own sense of accountability and governance to make service delivery better. Let me conclude on something that is, I think it's Ala Dickens, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We always talk about the challenges, but clearly this is a continent that has made tremendous progress in human capital, and we are riding on a wave of technological change that can be important. So let me just spend a word in my last 30 seconds on harnessing innovation. We all spoke about technology and the importance of technology. Technology can really make social services for people more accessible, fairer, so accessible to the poorest who need it the most, and also cheaper. And there's also a space where we should all try to be innovative. The gentleman who spoke at the panel before said we need to change the mindset. I wanted to conclude with an example that I found dramatically telling. It was published in one of the top journals in the world. It's an experiment on entrepreneurship in Togo. So in Togo, scientists, economists, and psychologists randomized different entrepreneurship interventions. One was the traditional one where there was training on accounting, how to run a business, the typical things that we do for training. The other one was the innovative one. It was a psychologist who tried to change the mindset of entrepreneurs. And what it taught was personal initiative. We tend to think of those traits as innate, but you can teach it. Lo and behold, after this was evaluated, the entrepreneurs who were taught to have initiative, to be proactive, to fight against adversity, saw their profits increase by 30%, 2.5 times as much as those who had training. So there's a lot of power out there for us to be innovative and make things better. So I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have on this.
Roberta, thank you very much. And again, a number of themes coming out of that are very important for us to come back to. But I want to go straight on to President Adesina and particularly ask you to touch on the point about agriculture and agribusiness, which was raised previously and which was also raised in the discussion yesterday at the Now Generation Forum. But also say a little bit more broadly about the areas where there should be added investment on the continent to help to leapfrog that economic development that's so important. And please remember, you've got 5 minutes.
Yeah.
I say that as your friend.
Yes, thank you. I can go on because there are big challenges that we're dealing with. Well, first and foremost, let me say that as I sit here this morning and as the whole conversation was going on, all I think about is how much we talk always about potential of our continent. Well, sorry, nobody eats that potential. We say that Africa has today 470 million young people. That's going to go to 1.2, literally almost 1.2 billion by 2050. Okay, fine. Question is this. 1/3 of those young people have no jobs. I think Minister Cissé was talking. 1/3 of those are in miserable employment, underemployed. And so you have a youth population that's supposed to be an advantage for the continent, but they are actually not happy. If you were to measure happiness index in Africa today, and you measure it by young people, you'll be shocked what you will get. And so the critical thing that we have to make sure that happens is that we have to take this demographic asset that we have and turn it into an economic powerhouse for ourselves in the world, in skills, in entrepreneurship, in competitiveness, in all manner of industries. We talk a lot, of course, I'm president of the bank, so we talk a lot about GDP growth, right? Who eats it? No young person can take a GDP per capita to a market, to a bank, and borrow money because it's high. The GDP, it's not the issue. In fact, I think that as economists, we should relook at what we're talking about GDP. We should not be talking about just gross GDP. We should be asking ourselves the question, what is the contribution of young people to that GDP that we are talking about? And so, like you can call it why GDP, why not? Aliko Dangote is here. I thought he was here this morning. He started his business as 21 years old. Bill Gates, my friend, and I'm collective friends for many of us here, started his business at 19 years old. Look at Bozo. Look at Microsoft. Look at Zuckerberg. These are the guys whose own businesses run the world. And so the question really we must be saying is, GDP can grow just because you have a lot of oil, so what? The issue is, how are we turning our human talent, entrepreneurship capacity, to drive mega businesses for ourselves? And that's what I want to see happen on the African continent. We must invest in hope. The young people, they are the hope of this continent. And that conversation is not a conversation for tomorrow. It's a conversation for today. Look, the old people that we have, the elderly on our continents today, will not be able to have retirement benefits, I'm sorry, in the years to come, because most of the young people that are supposed to be employed to pay all of those taxes that will continue to make sure you have retirement, they won't be able to do that. So life is going to be miserable for the old people as well. And so the issue is we must be very focused on this. Now let me come back to the issues of what we can do about what we are doing about it. First and foremost, the Prime Minister mentioned the issue of agriculture. Yes. Again, potential. 65% of all the arable land uncultivated in the world is not in Asia, it's not in Latin America, it's not in Europe, in the United States, it's in Africa. What Africa does with agriculture will determine the future of food in the world. But we can't just say potential. In agriculture, the size of food and ag businesses in Africa is going to be worth a whopping $1 trillion by 2030. So you want to be a billionaire? You want to be a millionaire? Get into agriculture. When I was Minister of Agriculture, I used to wear my bow tie just like I'm wearing this morning, because I think the coolest thing you can have as a business is agriculture. Who drinks oil? Who smokes gas? But you all had breakfast this morning. You're going to have lunch this afternoon. You're going to have dinner tonight. Food business is the biggest business, but we have to make it a cool business. Young people have to come into it as agriculture, as a business, not as a way of life, not as a development activity. I've said it as African Development Bank president. We're going to change the face of agriculture on this continent to a mega business. You're a minister here, you're producing cocoa, right? Lots of cocoa production. Your country, with Cameroon and Ghana, produce 65% of the world's cocoa beans. But we account for only 2%, $125 billion chocolate market. What's the brain surgery in making chocolate? Nothing. And so we've got to really make agriculture a powerhouse and getting young people into it. As the African Development Bank, we've launched a program that's called Enable Youth in Agriculture, which is, we've just done about $374 million in about 12 countries. And it's supposed to help 340,000 businesses of young people to come. They don't like to be called farmers, by the way, right? They like to be called agripreneurs. And I think that's a very cool way to be a farmer. The second thing I would say is what the Prime Minister said about the issue of the jobs of the future, the skills. Tech businesses are the businesses of tomorrow. And so as a bank, we are preparing that kind of a future right now. We have funds. You know, we don't even trust young people with capital. When a young person enters a bank, you see risk, 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 risk. You don't see opportunity. You don't see entrepreneurship. You don't see growth. And so as a bank, we're putting our capital at risk for young people. If we're not, then we're doing the wrong thing. And so we set up a couple of funds to support tech entrepreneurs. For example, we have one with EU. I think Stefano was here today. It's called the Boost, which is $200 million to support high risk but high-end businesses of young people on the continent. We set up a fund called Park Tech, which is €8 million facility to support, again, fintechs and so on in Africa. We have another one that is called Africa Tech Ventures. It's about $10 million, again, supporting businesses of young people.
You have about 10 seconds.
Yes, I will finish up in 10 seconds. And what I want to say, just to close, is this. I'll give you just one example of what our future can look like. We supported Rwanda to have a $30 million facility for Kigali Innovation Center. They train people. One of them is a lady I'm very proud of. Her name is Clarice Irugabisa. She was jogging one night. President Kagame was walking on the other side. She walked up to him and said, I want to talk to you about my business. And the military people pushed her away. She said, no, but you were trained after my African Development Bank facility. I went to Kigali Institute of Technology. But I have my business. So explain it very quickly to the president. President called her to the president's villa and gave her a small grant. Within 2 years, she turned that business into a $20 million business. That is the kind of youth we have in Africa today. Those are the kind of youth we should be investing in Africa today, because the youth that are here, I see many of them here today, they are not the future. They are the present of this continent. And I can guarantee you, as African Development Bank president, the most important thing we are going to do is to unlock that potential, because you have great potential to build the biggest businesses in the world. And we'll do that. Thank you.
Adesina, thank you very much, and it's a great point on which to bring in Natasha Kimani, who I know is very concerned about the investments in young people, but also particularly young women. So a challenge that's been put out there by Adesina. Can you pick it up?
Yes. First, I'll begin with tongue-in-cheek, with deference to my amazing panelists. We're talking about young people, but I'm the youngest person on the panel. So some food for thought there. But also, I'd like to challenge us on how we think and talk about young people. When we talk about young people, and for example, when young people refuse unpaid internships, we think they're entitled. But young people know their rights. So can we change the narrative about that? When young people want to become YouTube bloggers or musicians, we think they're lazy, forgetting that musicians are some of the hardest working people in the world. Ask Sauti Sol, ask Wizkid, ask Beyonce. They put in hard work. So we need to change how we think and talk about young people, how we talk to young people, assuming that they don't know what they're saying, assuming they can't speak for themselves, they can't speak about themselves. So instead of assuming we know what young people think, why not ask them? Lastly, which young people are we talking about? Are we talking to the middle-class Africans who are able to afford a foreign education and have an accent? And are we forgetting the young people in peri-urban and rural areas? I'd also like to talk about entrepreneurship. We idealize the word entrepreneurship. It's not a magic pill. Oriol Kolo, who's in the room here, often says that entrepreneurship cannot fix bad governance. I agree wholly. Because you have situations where a young person will get into entrepreneurship, but they cannot get into business because they have to pay 1,000 taxes. They have to jump over so many loopholes to get to the finish line. So they've started the journey, but they cannot finish it because of poor systems. And we are laughing about Brexit and the challenges that Britain is facing, but let's talk about the fact that if it didn't have such strong institutions, it would have failed. And right now, metaphorically speaking, London Bridge is not falling because of institutions. How many African countries would have survived what Britain is going through currently? Let's ask ourselves that question. I know my country for sure would not. Let's also talk about budgets and money. Where are you putting your money? We keep saying we want young people to thrive, but we are not budgeting for it. And we know governments budget what are their priorities. So we want to talk about young people and women, but they're not our priorities. Our budgets are not responsive to that. So we have small funds for youth funds, which account for only 1% of government budgets. What happens to the other 99%? Why aren't you including young people and women in everything you do? President Adesina talked about agriculture, and it's fantastic. I solely support his sentiments and the actions of the bank. However, young women and women particularly are unpaid with their labor in agriculture. So when are young women going to get their money? So it's a challenge not only to us, but even to our governments. I strongly believe that we must hold our governments accountable for young people to thrive. Often governments take the easy way out and say, development is also up to you. No, I'm paying taxes. You have a role to play in my development first. So unless we're splitting the taxes, I'm going to hold you accountable. So that's the first thing. The second thing, even when we talk about entrepreneurship, is remember a lot of young people are falling towards informal jobs. And informal jobs are extremely vulnerable jobs, where young people get taken advantage of, specifically young women. They're in vulnerable positions. So even when we push for entrepreneurship, are we ensuring that women are safe? Young men are safe? Are we creating safe spaces for young people to thrive? So those are the things I would love us to think about when we talk about young people, talk about them and talk to young people. Thank you.
Natasha, thank you so much, and that's absolutely why we talk about the now generation. So thank you again for putting that so succinctly. We have about 20 minutes before we need to end the session, and I'm very conscious that you've all been listening. The hands are already going up. I'm going to take a series of questions and then come back to the panel for their thoughts and for summing up. Can you make your questions as brief as possible so we can bring as many of you in? So let's start with the lady here in the middle. Where are the mics? And then there's a gentleman behind her to the right who will be next.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Anne Nyambane. I'm one of the Mo Ibrahim Academy Fellows hosted by Chatham House in the UK. Just listening to the discussion, you said that 470 million youth, we have 470 million youth. But if you look at the number of people in Africa without electricity, is 520 million. So it means that all the youths do not have access to energy, to electricity. And if you look at how much the electricity sector would actually play, especially when we've been talking about technology, we've been talking about innovation, we've been talking about agriculture, energy is the most important and a very key driver that actually could be promoted so as to ensure that the kind of livelihood that we want for the youth to take so that they can use that as the driver. And I'm not talking about just the energy that we are talking about, solar home system. It's about productive energy use. We should go beyond this thinking that the fact that some donor brought in some solar home system so that we can light our villages. We need to make sure that this energy is actually used for productive use so that we can do value addition in the agricultural sector and also the other sectors that actually run our economy and will actually enhance the economy of the youth and also Africa in general.
Thank you. Could you pass the mic straight to the gentleman behind you? Thank you.
Hi, Tufik Ibrahim, Executive Director of Globeside based in New York and Dubai. My question to you is, why is it that we keep creating examples of Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos? There's one Bill Gates, there's one Mark Zuckerberg, there's one Bezos, and this focus on creating new billionaires. Why isn't the discussion about how actually we should be creating more billions for the billion people in Africa in 2030 rather than creating more billionaires? Thank you.
Thank you. And there was a gentleman straight behind you. I am seeing the other hands. I will come to you. I'm just doing you in blocks, as they say. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rashid from Nigeria. Now, we keep on talking about job. But I believe the few ones that are opportune to even have the job, the remuneration wasn't a good thing. Most of the time, they are not well paid, and there is no welfare facilities. Recently, there was a job or a recruitment in Nigeria, NNPC, and more than 26 million people applied. Not all of them were jobless, but because majority who are even working doesn't have a proper welfare, the welfare was not there. Meanwhile, those that are opportune to be at the House of Assembly or our senators, the executive, they take care of themselves much more than every year. Their budget is super. Why can't we reduce this kind of thing? Mr. Cissé said something about let's provide. It is not about providing an enabling environment. It is about let us invest what we are investing on the government officials on this particular thing. If we have such thing, we have a lesser number of people that want to go out of Africa. But because the terrain was not even good for those that have the job, and that one makes it the problem. Create an enabling environment. All the resources people are taking, and I have there's a person representing European on the seats over there. Most of the time, European and America interfered in African affairs. Why can't you block the corrupt leaders that are taking our resources back to your own country to go and save it here without doing anything? Those resources, if it is invested in Africa, I'm assuring you, a lot of people will want to stay. But
so thank you. I think you've asked 3 questions, so I'm going to stop you right there. Thank you very much. And I hope you caught the 3 questions. One was around quality, the second was around investment, and the third was around Europe and America and supporting corrupt leaders. I'm going to take one more over here. I'm looking for a lady's hand. Yes, the lady at the back. I'm not going to be able to take every hand. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. There's a lady right at the back there. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Yawa Hansen Kwao. I work for an organization called Emerging Public Leaders. I know we've been talking a lot about jobs in the private sector, but what about public sector jobs? I worry that as we look at kind of the issues of the future and we're looking at the future of work, we're not paying enough attention to how to get competent and ethical young people into governance. So I'd love to hear what your ideas are about that. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to come back to the panel, although and then I'm going to come back to you in a moment. Let's start with the question on energy. Abdou.
Yeah, I mean, on the energy side, definitely you need to invest into production. I will give you another number to add to what you said. The 48 countries of sub-Saharan Africa produce the same quantity of electricity as Spain. And then, the population is not the same. So we know we need to invest into, capacity. We need to build capacity. We need to improve capacity. And if you take, for example, Côte d'Ivoire, we actually improve our capacity, but we also export electricity to other countries. Every individual country cannot, increase the capacity. There's a project that we're working on at the moment, which is a West African power pool, whereby people will be able to buy electricity, and then you can move from one country to another. So that's one thing. Second thing is connection cost, because we don't talk about it. I remember, we actually spoke to one of, in one area of Côte d'Ivoire, we put electricity, and then I sent people to actually check how people were feeling. And then one of the people there told me that the electricity that we brought to the place was only for the cats. I was like, wow. And the connection cost, you can bring electricity to any region, but the connection cost to have electricity at home in Côte d'Ivoire is around $300. Not everyone has $300 to pay upfront. So when we noticed that, President Ouattara decided to make sure that people only pay $2 to have the connection cost. And then they pay the remaining balance over 10 years. Mm-hmm. By the way, the African Development Bank is supporting us in funding this initiative. So yes, you need to increase capacity. Second, you need to make sure that you actually send electricity across the region. But on top of that, you need to make sure that the connection cost is affordable for the population.
Okay, Adesina, you wanted to add something very quickly on that?
Just very quickly on that. Just to say that when it comes to energy, we also have to realize that Africa has a lot of potential in renewable energy. And I don't accept that people think renewable energy is just not the thing to use for energy. It is. The African Development Bank helped Morocco to build a new Uzazate concentrated solar power plant. It is almost 800 megawatts today, and it is base load power for industries. So it works. Lake Turkana in Kenya, right? It is 350 megawatts. It is all from the wind, and it's base load, and it works. And that's why we at the bank, we are investing heavily in renewable energy for base load. I announced at the One Planet Summit to President Macron that we are going to be creating a base load renewable energy facility to allow Africa to power itself. Last thing I would say is in the Sahel, right? I lived and worked 14 years of my life in the Sahelian countries. They don't have electricity. May Robinson is sitting here as a global leader on the issue of access of women to clean cooking energy and also to desertification. We have all this great green wall that is built over there. No electricity, no clean cooking energy for women. So they're going to cut it all down. And so that's why at the African Development Bank, we've launched a major effort. It's called Desert to Power, which is to power the entire Sahel, right? From Nigeria, northern Nigeria, to Niger, to Chad, to Senegal, Mauritania, all of that. 10,000 megawatts. It will be the largest solar zone in the world. God loves Africa. He gave us the sun.
I'm going to stop you right there.
Just a second. Let me just finish that point. Because it's about love. God loves Africa. So, all we have to do is turn that potential of solar into power for ourselves. And it can be done, and it's been done.
Thank you. I want to... I wanted, because I want to come back to some more questions. So, Natasha, this point about, we keep talking about billionaires and all these men. Do you want to come back on that?
Yes. First of all, Mark Zuckerberg, everyone keeps talking about the fact that he doesn't have a university degree. Yes, he dropped out of Harvard. He didn't drop out of normal university. So let's begin by that and begin to talk about privilege and the perks that privilege comes with. I'm not even going to talk about the privilege of race. I'll just talk about privilege. Secondly, we need to talk about money in a different way. Are we just out to benefit the 1%? Or are the young, vulnerable Africans going to benefit from this revolution and the GDP that everyone keeps talking about? So we need to change the narrative of how we address money, how we address development, economic and socially. We need to ensure that it's inclusive, responsive, and representative. Yeah.
Thank you. And Hailemariam, very quickly, quality jobs. Yeah, so let me just come back to that in a moment. Hailemariam, the issue of quality jobs?
I think, first of all, I fully agree with the young lady that the energy production generation in Africa is lagging very much behind. I think we have to agree. If we have to create jobs, I think electricity, energy is number one, number two, number three. So this is lagging behind. My country has a very good example in this regard. We used to have only 320 megawatt capacity, but immediately we turned it to 10,000 mega capacity within the last 6 years. So it is possible, but we have to invest in it, prioritize in the energy sector, which is very important. And second, I agree with a young man also. We have to talk about the majority of our young people who are involved in small and micro enterprises, not the big ones. That can be said. You know, in Africa also we can count a number of big enterprises and young people who are successful, but that's not the case. Now the whole issue is the majority of our young people should engage, maybe 70% should engage on small and medium and micro enterprises, and that's where we have to focus. And I think this is where we have to change the whole scenario of thinking towards helping those guys.
Okay, thank you. Roberta, I'm going to come back to you next time. We'll start the next round with your point about the investment of the billions. There was a lady over here.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Karen Kaneza from the African Diaspora Youth Forum in Europe, and I'm coming from Burundi. I was looking at the numbers circulating behind, and it was quite striking to see the comparison we were doing between Europe and Africa in terms of the age range. So I had two questions actually, because we are talking about ideas and what kind of policies should be put in place in order to change the situations for the youth in employment. But I was wondering if some of you could just give me some implementable actions to prevent also the ongoing brain drain, and what are the implementing policies that maybe that are being put in place in order to attract also the young diaspora, in order for them to come back also and participate in the effort of the African development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to come back over here, and there's a gentleman there. We have a mic, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Patrick Worms with the World Agroforestry Center, and one of the things that I do is to try to look at transformative businesses across Africa, mostly run by young people. There is one such business in Zambia, for example, called Komako, which has the best human resource management system I've ever seen in an African corporation. Last week I was in Zinder in Niger, and I found a transformative company called Sahara Sahel Food that was turning over 50 abandoned foodstuffs from the Sahel that grow well in that dry environment and trying to make them desirable foods in Niamey and Zinder. That company could not find machinery. It could not find packaging material. It had to do everything by itself because of lousy infrastructure and because of extremely high import taxes into Niger, and because of low training of Nigerian youth. The question that I have is, what can the bank do to facilitate trade in industrial goods for agro-processing across African countries, and what can it do to encourage the cross-fertilization between African countries that have solved issues, such as, for example, human resource management, with those that need it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And final question from the gentleman over here.
Thank God the right wing wasn't forgotten. My name is Promise Amaha, and I'm an agripreneur. And right there seated is my mentor, the president of the AfDB. He included me in the growth enhancement scheme he set up in my country when he was Minister for Agriculture. Well, I play in the rice value chain, and I farm, I process, and I market. Currently, we are going serious issues of smuggled foreign rice into Nigeria, and that has greatly affected both the production of rice and then also jobs being created in the sector and the revenue. So most processors in Nigeria under the association called RIPAN are not able to sell rice because foreign rice is smuggled into the country, and in collaboration with some of our law enforcement agencies which are complicit. So I had to use this more realistic case study to invoke a level of strategy which we all expect. We've heard about the what and the why. What I think is missing mostly in this conversation since morning is the how. What are the strategies to be able to counter most of these issues? How do you create jobs where major issues like staple crops like rice, which is consumed majorly in Nigeria, cannot find expression because of the issues of smuggling of foreign rice, which is also aided by our law enforcement agencies. So we need to speak to more of the how than speak to. The most exciting part of this whole program today was the free kick between Uncle Mo Ibrahim and Dame Amina Mohammed. That's the best part of it. The rest has just been attack and defense. Africa attacks, Europe defend, and then there are no midfielders to kind of galvanize the strategy.
Okay, I think we get the analogy. Thank you very much.
Please, I need the rice value chain. It's very critical for the
Thank you. I'm very conscious that we're running out of time, and I really want to give the panel a chance to come back on those questions. So it's a minute each, and I'm just going to go down the row. And Adesina, I'm going to start with you, and don't forget about the investment of the billions.
Well, I'll be very quick. I think the young have to grow. I think that, I'm confident that Africa has young people. If we invest in them, they can build businesses. There's no reason why those guys who did Toyota and so on, they were very young when they did it. So we must think big. I don't want Africa to remain small. I hear a lot of things about small and medium-sized enterprises. We support them, and we want to do a lot more. But you have to connect them. They have to grow. We must think big as a continent. That's the point I'm making. Not to say it's only exclusive to those people. I want to say something about brain drain very quickly. We talk so much about brain drain as a negative thing. Today, the amount of remittances that Africa actually gets is higher than the foreign direct investment coming to the continent. It's also higher than the amount of official development assistance that Africa is getting. So actually, without a lot of those diaspora folks out there, Africa will be reeling in a lot of more problems than it is today. So we must also look at it as it's also an economic gain for us as a continent to be able to do it. And last thing I want to say is on agriculture. And just to say that, when it comes to the issue of agriculture, the fact is most of the food and ag businesses today, they are located in the urban areas, close to the port. Now you tell me, which farms do you find very close to the port? No, they bring in imported materials that actually you process, you send to the rest of the country. They are the link for the rest of the country. The bank is investing today. We've started a new program called Special Agro-Industrial Processing Zones. Special areas where we will invest concentrated investment, infrastructure, power, water, roads, ICT, so that you can give incentives, fiscal incentives, to those food and ag businesses that are all located in the urban areas today to move into the rural areas. You can process, add value to what you produce and be more competitive in regional and global markets. And the drift of jobs out of rural economy to the urban economy will stop. And the rural areas that we constantly call today, or appears to me, as zones of economic misery, we'll be able to turn them to zones of economic prosperity by building industrial processes around agriculture through value-added agriculture.
Thank you very much. Abdul.
Yeah. If I may, I'm going to come back on the public sector job and diaspora. I was part of the diaspora, by the way, and in 2011, when President Ouattara was elected, I actually came. But I came only because of good leadership. If we didn't have the right president, I would have stayed where I was. So good leadership is the first thing that people need before actually moving. I have a big responsibility as being, a young minister, because I know people are looking, upon and saying, is it going to work, or it's not going to work. I think one thing also when I joined the ministry, the first thing that I noticed, I went to, into a meeting where we had to do, a big negotiation. I came into the meeting, I saw the private sector, in front. There were like a lot of lawyers, and I only came with one or two guys. And I was like, okay, 500, pages of documents. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not stupid, so I can understand. But we need to make sure that we have people, in the public sector that are strong enough. I was quite fortunate to have a president that is really forward, looking. So he actually allowed us to hire people. So we hire people coming from abroad, people coming, from, the local system, from the private sector. Now we have a team of, youngsters, in all the different ministries that are quite technical to actually defend the right of the different states. So people shouldn't be afraid. Sometimes you can come, it's not going to work, but now you can come to the public sector and then go back to the private sector. It's not a one-way direction. I know that, if I leave the public sector, I might find, another job elsewhere. So people need to, they need to try. And we need our diaspora to come back home and serve the country. We need them. We actually opened a scholarship recently whereby every Ivorian that is actually admitted to a list of, a couple of schools that we actually defined, regardless of the place where he is, he can just write and say, I'm admitted and we're going to finance. Because we know we need that skills here.
Thank you. Hailemariam?
Thank you. I think Ethiopia is one of the countries in Africa where we have huge diaspora community. And the development what's taking place in my country is basically most of the diaspora people are involved in technology transfer, in research and development in universities and research centers. I think they have huge potential to support us. We call it not brain drain, it is brain circulation, because they need to go abroad and get the exposure. And we do not have that exposure in Africa. So we need to send them. I think sending them, Chinese are intentionally sending them to United States and UK, simply because they know that they can get exposure and come back and serve their own country. So I think diaspora is a very important asset for Africa, and we have to use it. Second, for the transformative jobs, again, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The Asian countries has a very good experience how governments should facilitate the small and medium enterprises by supporting them to be viable. And we can do that like the other countries have done. So governments should be at the forefront helping these, supporting these kind of companies to establish. So I think investment facilitation and avoiding all those red tapes and obstacles is very, very essential. And my country has tried some, and in terms of industrial parks development and technology parks development, and we were successful in those areas. So governments should be at the forefront supporting and facilitating those things.
Thank you very much. Roberta.
Well, many of you, including Natasha, raised the question of what about the most vulnerable? What about the poor? So human capital is often the only capital that the poor have. So if we want to invest and be serious about inclusive growth, investing in human capital, particularly of the poor, and investing in access to jobs for them is a fundamental component of a well-working system. Now, that investment is really everybody's business, the government, the private sector, the civil society. But it cannot not go through a competent and ethical set of public sector servants. I think it was Yawa who brought up that point. And it's very important to generate a cadre society where public servants are selected for their motivation and they are supported throughout their careers to serve and really make the difference. Because think about it, who made a difference more to any of you than, well, besides your parents, of course, than a teacher?
Thank you. And Natasha.
I'll speak about the public sector for just a second. It worries me that a lot of young people think that government is the best employer. That scares me because they believe that that's where the money is. And we've been shown that it's true. Those who work for government in a year or two, they have houses in places we know they cannot afford. So government should not be the best employer. And if it is, there's a problem. And we need to start talking about the elephant in the room. My colleague there said we are always talking about problems. Actually, I think we are not talking about problems enough. Because the more we make our government officials uncomfortable, the more they'll change. So I am for, and I'm a huge proponent of putting our leaders on the spot. And I do it every chance I get. Ask them the difficult questions. Because the more you ask, the more you get. Do not be afraid as young people to challenge. Believe that you can and you will. Yeah, cliche. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the startup world. A lot of the startups in Africa have an invisible foreign hand. So if we're encouraging young people to be entrepreneurs and to get into the startup world, can we also challenge the way we think about young people and encourage organic African-led organizations? Finally, to my young fellows who are in this room, dare to dream, dare to challenge. And it's okay to ask for what you think you deserve. It's not a bad thing. Get it, and you ask for it, and you'll get it. That's all.
It's been a very rich discussion of some very complex topics, which it's difficult to sum up, but the reinforcement of the strong link between governance, migration, accountability, growth, investment, the sense of urgency that's required in terms of linking policy and action, the importance of creating quality jobs, investment in education and skills, and in young women, making agriculture a business, making agriculture cool, let's remember that, changing the narrative and the way that we think and talk about young people, and giving them opportunity, not seeing them as a problem. And remember that entrepreneurship is not a magic pill. I love that line. And don't be afraid to challenge. Thank you all very much, and a huge thank you again to the panel. Thank you.